Hello, comrades, in this dialectical battle of consciousness. We are at the end. This could very much be the last video that I make about the phenomenology of the spirit. I'm not sure about that because I kind of would like to make one final wrap-up video in which I try to summarize the whole book in 10 minutes. But I'm not gonna promise that since I'm moving and flying and just literally carrying everything with me to a new life in a couple of days. So I'm not gonna promise that. And this video is also not gonna be as video-y as the ones that I've made before for Hegel, because I feel like, I started going page by page, then at some point the time in which I was recording the videos and the times when I had read the chapters began to be further and further apart. So I stopped doing that and began giving just summaries of what I could recall. And these last chapters, because it's quite a few chapters that we are wrapping up here, are also like, it is wide in scope, so maybe a summary would be more functional. But since I've been neglecting actually opening the book and looking at paragraphs and everything, we'll do this time. I'll just go through I'll basically name paragraphs and give you try to create a linear argument all the way to the end of the book from the chapter of reason, I believe. From the end of the chapter of reason, we have the one in religion, yeah, over there. But if you want me to make a video at some point talking about all the chatter of Hegel's historicism, he's talking about the Greeks and how he used the play Antigone to exemplify everything. It's actually really interesting to read when he actually applies it to history and tries to cover the different aspects of the polis and talk about even the family and the concept of the family, the social contract. All of these things bring the narrative to a much more relatable point. It's in some ways they were for me the easiest to read because probably I was familiar. I can also see how Nietzsche in his genealogy was very influenced. Maybe that is why. Maybe it's because there are quite a few chapters that I've seen kind of reproduced before in books that were certainly influenced by this one, even if the authors didn't read this one. Which is the case of Nietzsche. I don't think Nietzsche read Hegel. I think Nietzsche was just around Hegel, and that's all that influenced what he wrote. Yeah, I am gonna omit a lot. I just wanna arrive at absolute knowledge. So let's fast forward. Let's look through the important paragraphs, and then we'll wrap up. So we are in, if anyone needs me to put the ESFN, I don't think anyone is following this to begin with, but if anyone at any point actually uses these videos or anything like that, and you want to know the edition, I can put the ESFN, or however you pronounce that in English, in the description. But this is the General Oxford University Press. This is the one and only book that is given to students in every university in the UK, at least. And now we are the paragraphs are numbered, so now we are paragraph by paragraph. I'll just literally follow the argument through its different stages. But first, in the last chapter on culture, Hegel finished basically saying absolute freedom has thus removed the antithesis between the universal and the individual will. The self-alienated spirit, driven to the extreme of its antithesis, in which pure willing and the agent of that pure willing are still distinct, refuses the antithesis to a transparent form and therein finds itself. Just as the realm of the real world passes over into the realm of faith and insight, so does the absolute freedom leave its self-destroying reality and pass over into another land of self-conscious spirit, where in this unreal world, the freedom has the value of truth. So that's just to give you some context of where we are now. Now we are in that point of bringing we are in the point in which the moral rules are manifested in culture. He talks about the legal person, the concept of the legal person, and its idea of bringing the morality outside of the individual to the wide sphere, and the different reactions and actions that will do. So you have here, like in 597, you have legal personhood regains its connection with the ethical substance once we admit that culture has shares basically a single project, the project of enlightenment, and the object of the project of enlightenment is the description, the definition, the discernment, the understanding of reality. And that is something that later on in the chapters on faith, we'll see that it's kind of like the drive behind pretty much every human framework. In 599, you have a kind of like an objection. It's like, but this collective spirit has a moral duty, and there is a problem with that, because a moral duty, again, moral duty implies laws are external, and not only that, but implies as well that there is an authority, right? If there is an external authority to the moral actions of consciousness, then consciousness, as I think I wrote here, is not perfect. This authority is a master and a ruler of consciousness. So says the imperfection that we have, our imperfection, insofar as we have to follow these rules. The ruler by inference, being perfect, it's a God, and this is the moment in which consciousness begins. It has to gather again all this all this chaos that is generated in this realization, and religion is gonna come forth in the next chapter. And religion, ligin, liga, it basically comes from, I think, from Latin, but basically means relinking, like linking things back together. In this case, these concepts basically is what he's kind of arguing for. In 613, we have the moral spirit is in contradiction here, insofar as self-consciousness has to follow a duty that's at once actualized and unreal. The things I'm reading are not the paragraphs, which are way too long, are my annotations, which are summaries of these paragraphs, okay? Just in case you cannot find exactly the sentence. I'm telling you the paragraph, and then I'm giving you my own paraphrase version. Then in 619, you have, so, since consciousness cannot do the perfect action, it chooses not to act. And this is the beginning of what some Hegel is going to call the beautiful soul further ahead, which is a pejorative term. So the self-torture of this perfectionism that won't do good because it's not perfect, and therefore just chooses that non-action, it brings us to a state of stagnation. Non-action is just wrong, and it is an evasive move, because as much as consciousness tries to separate itself from the imperfect, its sensible nature is intrinsic to being moral, and the lack of action is a form of action. So it's not escaping; it's a fake evasion. Now, few pages ahead, and we go to 632 in the chapter of conscience, the beautiful soul that I was talking about, evil and forgiveness, and you have like two sides here. You have the creation of a holy law. This is where religion is kind of like, we start creating this natural law that's completely failed of the 20th century, as many have observed. But Adorno probably, and Nietzsche probably the number one of that group. But the law is not needed because the reality of moral action is known to consciousness immediately. That means that immediately means without mediation. So the necessity of any moral law, like that's why, for example, for me, reading actual ethics books, not Spinoza, not Nietzsche, like actual ethics books that are just based on rhetoric, like this is right, this is wrong, kind of like just doing it ends up being pure semantics in philosophy, in my opinion. What is wrong comes to us with immediacy. We do not require any reasoning to know what is right and what is wrong. It's immediately self-evident. Philosophy, as it often does, especially when it best accords to Heidegger's definition of what it is, basically it's the study of that which is considered self-evident, is taking this that we already know, and then let's see why this is in this, like, why is the sky blue kind of thing. And now let's find the reason, so that we just don't accept that dogmatically because it seems through intuition to be the right thing. Which sometimes is a good exercise, and sometimes it's just very tiring and unnecessary. You can tell me what you think about this book. Is it tiring and unnecessary, or is it a good exercise that is actually giving you further understanding of what knowing is, which is the same as absolute knowing? In 638 and 639 we have consciousness is actual and perfect because it realizes its actions. I don't know what I wrote here. Immediately. Yeah, so the actions are just realized immediately, that they do not require that mediation. And also because at this point it has achieved self-certainty, but it's a fake one, because it's still through a third-person major figure that does not bear any real connection with the world in which we can recognize and interact. So in 644 we have, but change doesn't allow us that perfection. We live in the contingency of a natural being, of our natural beings. Change, the contingency, it's referring to that. We are limited, and not only that, but we change. Any fixed natural law up there is never gonna be untouched. It's never gonna remain as gospel. Eventually, it will expire, like all laws do. And that is why we require, that's why at the end of the previous video I said that we require an universal that it will self-actualize. Because if it's determined by an individual, then it will always expire, and therefore it will never sustain the harmony that it might create momentarily for long enough. So in 646 we have self-assurance equals autarky. So that's just showing you basically how, like, the different aspects of the self-consciousness, its contingency, derive into the wrong kind of paths or attitudes or whatever. And then consciousness is the death of morality in this specific aspect. And basically in 652 is talking about, like, how the different engagements within society, the different interactions between consciousnesses are just attempts at mutual recognition. I speak to you, I try to engage, drawing in conventions and historical context and all of these things. But all of these things there needs to be some certain coherence, like a fragmentation that Alasdair MacIntyre also talks about in his book After Virtue, probably the best book of this century in terms of the philosophical world. Although it wasn't published this century, I just read this century. But it's probably like the most recent work of philosophy that to me felt like, written by a philosopher, that felt like I was reading a classic, basically. If I were to write a history of philosophy, probably would end it there. Because I think MacIntyre wrote after, like, the post-structuralists, for sure, because he's still alive. Right, I'm so bad with dates, doesn't matter. So in 655, we have consciousness speaks with a divine voice, convinced that its word is moral. So it puts itself out there. It presents this with an unawareness of the possibility of its failings when it comes to that not being moral. But our self-certainty is untruth, because the divine does not speak our language. We create, you get the figure of the priest, you get the person that brings this moral law to you. And this moral law was coherent and it made sense when it was created, but it did not self-actualize. Now it's given to you by an individual. But when the individual is talking, it's its own language. There is no divine language that can be spoken. Therefore, there's no sacred book. There is no book or law that is going to give you what you're looking for when you read any holy text. And I don't want to start mentioning it because I don't want more hatred in this channel. I think with a couple of haters that I have more than enough. But yeah, I mean, like, I have a couple of friends who are, like, a lot into psychedelics, and they take have some friends who are, like, genuinely Olympic athletes when it comes to taking certain drugs, especially psychoactive ones. And they talk about their trips and about like all the knowledge that they gained when they went there. And I always say the same, if you really had a revelation, if you actually really experienced anything that you would call the divine when you went to this other side and had all of these things, in which in reality we just like that for 2 hours. That's what happened. You were just hallucinating. But let's say that you connected. Let's say that you actually like breached into a new dimension. If that happened for real, then and the final book with the final answer, the final moral law was given to you, you would not be able to understand a word. It's as if I give I don't know, like a kid born in the UK who doesn't even speak English yet, a book in Chinese. It doesn't matter what's saying on that book. The kid will not be able to discern it. So similarly, the divine does not speak our language. Therefore, like these voices that appear preaching the moral law have no legitimacy, and that definitely they are not bringing something that will be self-actualized and continue, and universal that will actually maintain harmony throughout time. Thus, the beautiful soul refuses to act, and this is going back to the non-action that we talked about before. Because they want to sort of freeze themselves into this given maxim. So that they can remain perfect. The beautiful soul refuses to act, obsessed with the perfection of their conviction. And the only way to maintain that perfection is not to act. The beautiful soul is a coward. When Hegel says beautiful soul, he's using it on a pejorative sense. It's a negative term. And yeah, that reminds me also like of quite a few people I know. In 666, not the Bolaños, there's one 6 missing, or no, 1 missing for that to be Bolaños' novel, but paragraph 666 we have, and from the pedestal it mocks and refuses the recognitions of those that try. This reminds me of a friend who told me recently that he doesn't want to come across the Atlantic with me. I'm planning to circumnavigate the world on a sailboat that will be a very small and precarious sailboat because I don't have much money. And he told me that he won't come because I'll die. And so my friend, just like the beautiful soul, is not willing to try. He prefers to lay back on his couch and see me try and then laugh at my failure. And what I can respond, like Hegel is saying here, is that, at least I did try. I did what I wanted to do, and if I fail on my attempt, even if that ultimately means facing my own death, at least I did try, which is all we're here for, right? Yeah, this is also, as you can say, philosophy is really, has lends itself to pep talks. But because of that arrogance, it also misses the recognition. Because if you are stepping back and you are not recognizing the other one as like part of this whole fabric of this as an equal, basically, and if you are not taking the risk of doing that, then you cannot achieve recognition either. So you're kind of like stuck. So in 668 we have, it is only the confession that breaks this hard heart. And every confession requires forgiveness. Here is bringing, because we are still talking about like in the concept of morality and religion and the moral law, the confession is this idea of, like, I bring to you like my most inner self. I present it like before you, and every confession has this sort of like, I'm asking for forgiveness. Forgiveness is like the ultimate form of recognition. Even like I see that which is completely disruptive. I see that in you that I am not, and I recognize it. I accept it, and that is in this recognition that happens, we achieve the last step of consciousness that can now be completed. And this is to say that now we have to do a bigger jump, I think, to the next chapter, and we have in 676. We are now in religion. The previous chapter was still morality. I'm a bit of ahead myself because I'm trying to close many chapters at once. This is actually 676 all the way to 679. We are basically relinquishing the sense in which we are different, the idea of difference. which is interesting since Hegel at the beginning of this book said that this book is all about radical difference, because it's not that kind of difference. It's not the difference of like difference is contained. It's precisely like, you know, in a very Sissekian sense, which of course is took it from Hegel as well. It's the idea of like, you know, tolerance doesn't mean that I understand you. Tolerance means that I understand I don't understand you, and that's fine. So now we jump ahead like a long way ahead. Let's see, did I mark it? I'm certain I folded the page. Yeah, this is probably the biggest jump we've done in this book, so I don't want to be talking about the Greeks for 2 hours. And then 795, the contradictions end. That's all what I wrote. In the moment we get that recognition, you know, like you can trace up and down all you want, but the conclusion is that there's no more contradictions, and that is why the book ends here, because all that the book wanted to do is analyze consciousness from its more basic state and sense certainty, its first appearance as this authority of intelligibility, and take it all the way to the point in which it's finally self-coherent. And in 796 we have self-consciousness is the simple unity of knowing. That is what this self-consciousness or natural consciousness is. And in 798 we have the concept covers all that exists. We've been basically, because this is the way in which Hegel differentiated himself from Kant, is that he was not analyzing the subject, because then if you don't go far enough, you don't arrive at absolute knowing. You may arrive at a knowing of the subject, but you don't arrive at absolute knowing. This book kept going in this dialectical process from the individual to the universal. And we talked about history, like the book talks about history, it talks about like the socio-political and socio-structural aspects of society and of the like from the Greeks. I mean, for him, the ancient world is just the Greeks. As for most philosophers, it is very convenient not to have to read about like other societies and everything. Very, very, very Western, very European, and of course, all of those critiques are completely valid when it comes to Hegel. But the point being that like in his little world, everything has been covered. Within his framework, everything has been addressed and solved, in the sense of like invalidating contradictions or cancelling them through further advancement to the next dialectical stage. And that's where we are at now. In 802 we have absolute spirit has transformed from substance to subject. And I think this, my friends, is the end. I have one more paragraph, 804 and 805, and basically this is like removing the difference between removing the difference between us or consciousness and reality. Because it is not at so basically there is the way in which this gap, which was the thing that we needed to remove in order to achieve self-certainty, and we could only achieve self-certainty through like achieving certainty of everything through like a recognition of the outside world and our world, is was achieved basically by arriving at the conclusion that the difference between us and others is not ontological, it's not a basic metaphysical difference. We are only ontically different, referring to Husserl. I think he was the first one to talk about that. Edmund Husserl, first phenomenologist. This book, although it's called The Phenomenology of the Spirit, is not about phenomenology. Phenomenology is a posterior school of thought that, of course, is partially influenced on this. But so it's ontical. It's you might have a different haircut, but that can change. You might have a different personality, but that can change. On our essence, in speaking on these terms, because we are reading Hegel, we are the same, and we are also the same as the world. There is no ontological difference, therefore there is no difference. This movement is the one that overcomes the estrangement or the alienation, and self-consciousness or the natural consciousness is now at home in the world. All things are finally knowable. Once we bridge that gap, we can know everything and anything, and that is sort of like the end. So just to wrap up, what this book was promising was absolute knowing in its own terms. It brought you through self-certainty, sense certainty, to certainty outside in the world, through like we have the chapter on perception, yeah, certainty outside on the world. Then we come back inwards, then we go back outwards, and through all of these different stages, we arrive at before we arrived at self-consciousness, which was like a critical point as well, because that's the coming back in. We have sense certainty, which gave us perception of the world. Then we go into the self-consciousness, which gave us our own certainty of like we exist, and therefore we are the measure of the world. Then we go back out, back in, back out, back in, and like this we cover every single aspect of our geometry and the geometry of the world. Again, you know, within Hegel's little bubble of Europe and of the Greeks and all of this and that, I'm giving you a summary. I'm not making a case for his argument. Although something that I find incredible about this book is how coherent it is. It's the most, I'm gonna say the most complex book I've ever read in terms of philosophy, and certainly the most coherent. I don't know if it's the most complex, but it's certainly the most coherent. And because of its scope, that is very hard. Systematic philosophy always has limits. Goethe used to say, you know, to grow you have to limit yourself, and certainly Hegel does. There's many ways in which you can see this as sort of like a narrow view. This is, but it's within systematic philosophy. This is as wide as it gets. He's trying to solve philosophy. And philosophy has been trying forever to solve the world and itself and human nature. So by solving philosophy, he sort of like, within the frames of philosophy, kind of like arrives at this "I've solved everything" kind of thing, which is like the very arrogant claim that everyone knows, is that, you know, Hegel kind of says like, you know, I'm at the end of the thing. What they don't know is that within his own framework, the fact that he solved anything, it doesn't mean anything. He cannot claim any merit from it, because he just sees himself as the last stone. In that sense, you know, like when we were talking about Tolstoy's historical determinism, we might as well be talking about Hegel's historical determinism, because it's the same. This knowing, this absolute knowing that he was talking about, is it's not a knowing of facts. It's not knowing every single particular in the world, but it's knowing the method, the interaction, it's knowing the recognition. I have a note here that I think summarizes it a bit better. It says the next. What consciousness has gained by now are not the particular events, but the interconnection of all shapes of consciousness in their totality. The aggregation of these concepts in an organic whole that we can call the absolute. The concept of the dialectical movement of categories of the universal and the individual. This concept, being the soul of the world, has the same structure of human consciousness, but the human and the world are not simply a mere succession of physical objects, but mainly a historical and social world. This is based on like this quote from Hegel, this something like, philosophy is its time philosophy is its time learned in thoughts. And then the quote continues, Hegel's idealism extends its approach beyond the Kantian subject to the absolute by introducing every aspect of human experience, what we were talking about, culture, history, identity, all of these things. But this absolute is not a subject learning from an external world, but consciousness in its many stages, knowing and tracing the conceptual fabric that unites this totality. This fabric is the dialectic. It's the dialectical of the universal and the individual, and that is that's what this book has arrived at the end. It was certainly a promising quest from the beginning. It's a very bold claim. It's the best way to get people to read your book, and I mean, I'm glad I did it. This is incredibly influential on other works, and it's also being I don't understand why the word didactic, it has a negative connotation when you say it on English. In Spanish, it doesn't have that connotation. It just means something that teaches you something, and I like things that teach me. I don't like them when they are teaching me down, which I think is kind of like the reason why it has that connotation in the English language. But I don't know what other word or synonym that doesn't have that negative connotation to use. I've certainly learned a lot about where 20th century philosophy is coming from now. And apart from that, I also think that the exercise of deciphering this guy's prose is certainly just very cognitively rewarding. Only for those two reasons, I am glad I read this book. I won't know, I never know how much I like a philosophy book until a couple of months have passed and I've read other books and everything. So I cannot give you like a 5-star ranking or a 2-star ranking. As with most books that are on this specific genre, if we can call philosophy a genre, I always have strong feelings in both directions. And I'm going to leave you with that. I'm interested if you actually have a better conclusion, something more definitive, please leave it in the comments and let me know if you read it or if you're planning to read it, or maybe even, I don't mind if this video is seen by someone else in the future, in years ahead from the moment this is the nice thing about this social media as opposed to others, that it has a better continuity. The videos last longer. So if anyone at any point reads this book and comes here and he wants to tell me in which ways I was wrong, that's also welcome, and I'll still come to you even if I don't remember the book anymore, which I hope that's not the case. I hate forgetting books. And I'm gonna leave it on that note. Hopefully I'll make a more simple and comprehensive video in the next coming days, probably from a completely different background and state of being, and different states of consciousness as well. But yeah, that's all. Thank you very much, and I'll see you on the other side.